My name is Adam. I've done a lot of things in my career, mainly all fashion-related. I'm currently a fashion photographer, and I've suffered from anorexia. Yeah, I'm 38 now. I don't think I've really recovered from my eating disorder. It's still something that affects me greatly day to day. I think about the stereotype of what an anorexic person is a lot because obviously for me, I'm not that stereotype. I definitely haven't been cured of an eating disorder. It's just morphed itself into something else in depression.
When it comes to, I guess, sort of choosing food or meals, it's not something I really want to be a part of. I don't like the idea of cooking or nice food. I don't even really think of it as food. I just think of it as a task I need to do, and this is just an object. As soon as I start to think about it too much, those thought patterns will generally sort of spiral from there.
Now, being a dad, I want to be well. I don't want to feel depressed. I don't want the people around me to be affected anymore. Having been through what I've been through, it's such a lonely and awful place to be, that if even helping just one person not feel like that, then that's what I want to do. Being a dad, it's changed. It hasn't necessarily got better. It's put me in more of an internal conflict.
Do you want to get me a bowl for you?
Oh, Daddy.
Good boy.
Because before, if I was depressed or really struggling, it would make me feel as though I didn't want to be here, I didn't want to live.
Okay, we want to take these? Sure, want me to carry them? Are you all right carrying them?
And having a young boy, it changes that completely. It's just made me realize that I just have to get better.
Adam is incredibly hard on himself. He is so gifted. I often think that it's probably because he achieved so much so quickly at such a young age that has kind of set him up to think that anything he ever does he's going to be the best in the world at it within 5 minutes. And if he's not, then he's failed.
So we're heading out to Manurewa in South Auckland, which is where I grew up. Grew up out there with just my mum and my younger brother. It was a real struggle for my mum to make ends meet for us, and you know, I couldn't be any more thankful to her for a massive amount of work and sacrifice that she made for us to be given the opportunities that we were given. This one here. We moved out here after my parents divorced and my grandparents lived in Anorexia. This meant that we were close by. Lots of times with no power or no food and cold, and the house is very damp. From when I was about maybe 9, I always had this butterflies in my stomach and this really anxious feeling. As time went on, as it would get later and later, and you know, I expect my mum home at 5, and as it would get to like 5:30, 6, which you know, it was probably just the traffic or whatever, I would just get more and more anxious and more worried, and go inside and try and call her and come back out and wait. Just needed to double check that everyone wasn't escaping. My mum told me I couldn't sleep to try and think of really great things. And so every night I would lie there and think about being a famous footballer and having a fancy car and living in a mansion and having, you know, even as a young kid, I remember thinking, you know, having a wife and kids, you know? That just became all I wanted. I guess from a really young age, I decided that I wanted to be a professional footballer, and very quickly it had become to look like it was going to happen. Football was such a massive part of my life growing up, and it was a way of escaping a lot of realities of what was going on in my life. It was the first time I realised that I have a personality that's quite obsessive and quite perfectionist and quite incredibly driven. And I also could see results quite clearly, so it would drive you even further. By the time I was 15, I was living in Middlesbrough, playing for a Premier League football club. First time I ever really experienced coaches and adults treating me a bit more like an adult. Special coaches and people who played for the All Whites and offering to kind of sit down with me and give me extra training sessions. The one thing that people keep kind of harping on to me was like, you just had to be really, really fit and strong. I really started to just hone in on that and used to go for runs as much as I could and exercise outside the house when it was dark. I would just become quite obsessive about that, and I started to be a little bit more wary about what I ate. You know, very quickly it all came to an end. I had started to get sore hips and back quite often. No one could really figure out what was going on, but progressively it just got worse and worse. Then I couldn't go back to Middlesbrough because I just couldn't play. I just knew I couldn't do it. The end of my football career was something that I couldn't control. But the one thing I learned during that time was that there were things you could control in your life, and I guess very obviously I was able to control what I ate and how much I exercised. But the only other thing that I really hadn't this identity around was this like love of fashion and creativity and art. Just bend your elbows a little more so you're more like, yeah, that's it. I think that there are links potentially between the fashion industry and media with regard to unhealthy diets or fad diets or anything like that.
Yeah, that looks good.
But I personally don't really see any connection between the fashion industry and eating disorders as such, as a mental health issue.
It looks so pretty. Pretty when the light comes through her
Yeah,
hat
I was thinking
as well.
that. I think when it comes through, if you see it come through her hair, I'll get in closer and do a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
From my experience, eating disorders come from a much deeper place than wanting to lose weight or wanting to look a certain way.
You bring that sponge down a little.
I think that an eating disorder comes from a place of mental unwellness, and in a lot of cases it's based around a want for more control or a lack of control. I moved to London and I needed a part-time job. There was this amazing store called Brown's that everyone knew about in New Zealand. I was like, that's amazing, that place, and they sell all the cool stuff. I just walked in and asked to speak to the manager, and you know, he just looked me up and down and thought I looked cool and said, you can have a job. Whilst this was happening, that ability to restrict food, you would get a lot of positive reinforcement from the weight you lost or how thin you were. And then anorexia just took over everything, really. At my worst, I was probably about 20. I weighed around 56 kgs. I'm 6'3". guess your brain just doesn't really function in the way that it should, and physically you have no energy to be able to for your brain to function, but even for your legs to work. Physically, I couldn't walk. Basically, you know, I couldn't do my job. And I always make sure my lunch times were not with my friends or the people I worked with, so that they didn't know that I wasn't eating. But I just go up there and I'd be really looking forward to the glass of water. And I just sit there by myself, and I would convince myself that that was just like a really good reward for getting through to midday. I couldn't work, so I couldn't afford the flat that we were in. So I moved into a little hostel. I'd go to the supermarket and get like one bread roll, and then I'd come home, I'd chop the bread roll up into 3, and I'd have the first third for breakfast. I was so depressed and so down. I needed to just go home.
My mum and I don't really talk a lot about this kind of stuff. I'd love to kind of be able to ask her a little bit about what her perceptions were when I was going through the bad times.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Go through.
It's hugely important for me to make my mum know that she's in no way responsible with anything that's happened, whether it be eating disorders or depression.
Look at the food.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you, Bronwyn.
How she raised me and my brother and what she went through to do so. I'm such a massive fan of what she did, and I owe her so much for that.
When he went over, he was really happy. Things seemed to be going really well when he was there. Then all of a sudden it was like, I'm coming home next week. It's like, and that's when he arrived home, it wasn't the same person who went over.
What were your thoughts and your thinking around like when you first noticed that I wasn't very well?
When you were playing lots of soccer and almost semi-professional, is things like the obsession in what you would eat, because you would only have grilled chicken or grilled fish with rice, and that was every day, and that was really unusual for us to do that.
At what age?
Probably late 20s, late teens.
After I'd been playing in England and when I came back,
Yeah.
and when I was trying to, like, when my back wasn't good and I was trying to play again, and I was playing for, like in the National League clubs here, and I was trying to, I guess it was around that time.
It all just crept up, like it wasn't obvious about what was going on. And because it was linked a lot to events of other things, you know, it was very easy for me to think, well, it was related to that rather than something else. I'm very quiet, I'm quite reserved. So someone else being quiet and reserved didn't sort of trigger to me that there was something wrong. I'm also an optimist, so I, you know, for a long time did the, it'll get better, it'll get better, it'll get better. And of course it doesn't. But also, even now, it's still, I don't know what I can do to fix it. And that's probably the big thing that worries me the most.
The unfortunate thing for Ange and my mum is that because I don't talk about this stuff daily, they both probably don't see things coming and they're getting worse, and then all of a sudden they're the only two I ever go to when it's really bad. It's really unfortunate that the only two people that I really trust are the people that I end up, like, hurting the most by this stuff.
So yeah, I have a partner who is very unwell mentally. He, you know, has challenges that may be with us all our lives. But there's much more good. Meal times at our house means that I cook, because Adam doesn't cook. If it were up to me, I'd have like fish and salad or, you know, I'm really not a food person, but because of the boys I end up cooking great big pastas and rice dishes and lasagnas and that kind of thing, roast chicken and over again. So please don't watch closely. The thing I struggle with most is that he doesn't eat particularly healthily. I think it affects his mood and all sorts of things. But I feel like I could never say, hey, maybe don't eat that, or maybe try something else, because I know that in his mind he will turn that into a weight thing.
What are we having for dinner tonight, babe?
Now we're just having veggies and chicken with some turmeric and some other random things that I throw in there, and some rice. Or perhaps some satay sauce as well. But hey, it's called a Wednesday surprise.
My eating patterns have changed during that time that I've been with Ange. A couple of years into our relationship, I started to develop this way of coping where I found it easy just to not think about any decisions around food.
Basically, it's like whenever it comes to thinking, oh, I have to eat something, like I'm hungry, I want to eat something, I just go, well, I just want to eat the thing that
You like,
that I like.
enjoy.
Because as soon as I think to myself, well, I should eat something more healthy, then as soon as that even enters my head, the whole thing completely spirals. So I just choose not to have that inner dialogue. My only way of dealing with it right now is to avoid it, basically.
Avoid that internal conversation.
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever really dealt with the issue, whatever that may be. I think angry. I moved back because I thought that I'd got somewhere really big. I could go home now and relax. Then I picked up a camera and I had to start all over again. Because I was like, oh shit, now I have to get somewhere big with this. So I was like, oh shit, we have to do this whole thing all over again. Okay, thoughtless. Frustrated. I just really try and imagine that you are really, like, I don't know, with uni or something at work, you're really frustrated. Yeah, that's great. Like, really not sure what to do. Yeah. Great. Having anorexia was really bad, but then also over the last 10, 15 years, I've had depression like really, really badly, and that becomes like a massive part of who you are. Yeah, that's good. Changes what you do in life, changes how you act, changes your career, changes like everything. Sad? I'm still pretty like obsessive when it comes to work, but I'm not like obsessed with becoming the biggest, best thing you've ever seen.
I'm really interested to speak to Dr. Cynthia. One of my main concerns is the welfare of my son Axel, and whether he has any predisposition to eating disorders or any other mental illness. Hi, Cynthia. I'm Adam.
Hi, Adam. Nice to meet you.
You too. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
I'm really interested in the studies that you've been doing. Obviously, you know, having suffered from anorexia, I have a lot of problems with depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
And obviously hearing about your study, that's really interesting to me. Because I think it's one thing for yourself to go through something, but the fear of your child going through that, and it is just, it's so awful. So the idea of someone so close to me having to endure any part of that is just, I can't think of anything worse, you know? And my partner and I are already starting to feel a little bit almost over cautious whenever we see signs of anything, which could and probably are just normal 3-year-old behavior.
Let's go down that path a little bit right now because it is such an important one. And that question is one that I hear all the time. So basically, we've known for a long time that anorexia runs in families. That doesn't mean it always runs in families. So you do have sporadic cases that just pop up in a family, and you don't know. But we also don't necessarily know if all of our relatives didn't have anorexia. Parents who have been through this are really vigilant. You know, they're looking for all the signs, things that might be normal. You know, your antenna are just a little bit more tuned in to what these things are. And we actually don't have guidebooks for this.
Of course.
You know, the parenting books don't tell you, you know, what's normal and how to tell a fad from something that's going to be lifelong. So, and, you know, what I tell people all the time is the most important thing is to have a really good relationship with your GP. Make sure that person knows the story and knows the history. You know, if you start seeing your child, you know, falling off the growth curve, you know, you want to make sure that your child is continuing to track.
In a steady kind of fashion,
Yeah, steady fashion. And if it starts deviating down or something like that, have a talk with your GP, get it evaluated. And people are hesitant sometimes to bring a child in for a good psychological evaluation. But at the same time, don't wait. Getting a professional to cast his or her eye on the child and say, hey, I think you're okay here. But then at least there's a baseline. We published one study where we actually have identified the first gene that plays a role in anorexia. Now, this is one in what will probably be hundreds and maybe even thousands.
Right.
And I think that's really important to understand is that anorexia is a complex trait. It's not just genetic. So anorexia, for example, is about 50 to 60% heritable, which means that 50 to 60% of the liability is due to genetic factors. The rest is due to environmental factors. Interestingly, depression's the same.
Oh, that is interesting.
But now we're really drilling down so that we can identify the actual genes that might be shared between the two illnesses. And every time we identify another gene, we get closer to understanding the biology of the illness. We have not a single medication in the world works for anorexia nervosa. And part of that is because it's been really under-researched. Eating disorders has been stigmatized and, you know, pushed to the side, and really, honest to God, it's been misunderstood. Now, what you're saying is that the anorexia has sort of been pushed down, but the depression and the anxiety have surfaced at this point. What's really interesting about it, often the anxiety comes before the anorexia. Most people, you know, people who aren't prone to anorexia nervosa, when they starve or when they skip meals or restrict their food intake, they tend to get more anxious and irritable, and they feel uncomfortable and scratchy and headachy. But what we hear from people who are predisposed to anorexia nervosa is sometimes restricting their food intake actually calms them a little bit.
Right.
So it's sort of a way that people stumble upon, you know, if they skip a meal or if they go on a diet or just reduce their food intake. And the sensation is sort of like, wow, this is really weird. This kind of makes me feel better if I don't eat as much. Does that ring any bells with you, Adam?
To cut a long story short, yes. But I think that for me, I'm not even sure if I was aware that that's what was happening until now you've said it.
Well, yeah, I kind of just thought that I had anxiety or I was an anxious person, and then that kind of went away and then was replaced by anorexia. But in hindsight, what you're saying is that it's just become a sort of a way of dealing with the anxiety or making the anxiety go away to some extent.
Right.
Or masking it.
Right. Or managing it. You know, in some ways, whatever it was that made you discover that restricting made you feel better, that's the hook.
You know, for me being 38 years old, and I just, you know, for anything that you've suffered from for a long period of time and over 20 years or longer, however you can look at it, is something that you eventually reach a point where you just don't want to have to deal with it anymore. And you're willing to just do whatever it takes to try and make it better. I wish that there were better things in place. I wish that there were better ways to manage these things. But I also understand that they're not simple things to deal with, and
Well, yes and no. I mean,
maybe they are.
you know, I think the trick is, you know, and I'm going to help you with this. You know, we just need to get you you're kind of crazy talking to North Carolina to get yourself a referral in New Zealand, right? But at the same time, you know, I mean, I'm a huge believer in, you know, medication and therapy. And, you know, you get there's some really wonderful treatments for depression now. You know, and doing both at the same time, I think that's the kind of extra boost that you need in order to sort of, you know, kick it up a notch and get yourself well. You know, because you were talking about, you know, having a son now and everything, and, you know, you got a family, and, you know, and you're worried about his future as well.
The studies around the genetic predisposition was really interesting because obviously it gives me a better idea of how to go about working with Axel on any potential issues. And then the other thing I think that was really interesting was just the huge percentage that shows that eating disorders and depression are so clearly linked. And whereas it just makes you feel like you're not the only one, because there's obviously, you know, so many other people that it's been proven now that they're going through exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. One of the hardest things to deal with is the idea that you are very much in these things alone. The people who care about you a lot, they're working so hard, so intelligent, with resources behind them, trying to find solutions and trying to find just ways to communicate to the world how these things could be solved. It's the best feeling you can have, really.
In the good times, I think I would do anything for us to be this happy and for things to be this great all the time, you know, and I'm kind of reminded in those moments, I'm reminded of what it can and could be, and I think I'm prepared to fight till the death for this, you know, for him and I and Axel and the boys and everyone to live happily ever after. In the bad times, I still love him. Totally, absolutely.
Today I'm feeling really positive about the future and feeling like there's a pathway to take to get better. I want to get better for, you know, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, watch out. I don't want for anything more than to get better one way or another. Yeah.
Attitude was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.